Okay, we start in a few minutes. So let's see. Lars is not on the way. We start in a few minutes. Hi, Andre. Can you hear us? Hi, Lars. Lars, can you hear us?
Yes.
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. How are you?
Very busy. I'm preparing for NG Poland.
Okay.
I'm just very deep in my process.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so let's wait 5 minutes. Maybe we have more people here. As I said, we are also live on YouTube.
Hello, guys.
Hi, Andre. How are you?
Hi.
I'm fine, thank you. What about you?
Yeah, everything is cool.
Yeah, good.
Where are you from, by the way?
From Warsaw.
Ah, Warsaw.
Yeah. I think we are neighbors.
Okay. Yeah.
Nice to meet you guys.
Okay. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
How are you doing, Avi? Avinash?
Yeah, I'm doing good.
It's pretty late in India, isn't it?
Not pretty late. Just had a dinner and then sit for a one for a.
Okay, great. Good that you could join us today.
We're meeting first time also.
Yeah. There's a lot of virtual first-time meetings these years.
Right.
I'm crossing my fingers I can come to Poland a month from now, to NG Poland.
Yeah, totally. I think we can slowly start. Avinash, what do you think?
I'm ready.
Are you ready? That's perfect. Hi, Alexander.
Hello.
Philip is on the way. Okay, Avinash, I think you can start. So welcome everybody to the Angular online meetup. It's Angular Warsaw is like 34 times we meet together. Online meetup is like a 10th maybe. So last 2 years we meet 10 times, I think. And yeah, thank you so much. You are joining us. Thank you, Avinash. Thank you, Lars. Avinash, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thanks all for joining it. I'll start it. Let me introduce myself. Myself, Avinash Dalvi. I'm a full stack developer and currently working as a software engineer too at EagleView, India. I'm a passionate about Angular and AWS more. So a lot of my research goes and study goes on the two topic. Also, I'm an open source follower. I keep checking out and writing the blogs on the multiple things, whatever I'm learning it. So today I'm going to talk about the Angular, like data sharing between the two Angular app, like which will hosted on the two cross domain. So let me share my screen. Yes, so this is about today. So it's like a share cookies or local storage data between the cross domain in Angular. So we'll get to know the small concept of that particular thing, and we'll jump into the actual part. So as I introduce, I'll start next. So today's agenda will be like what is the cookie and local storage data is like, then why it required to share between the two domains. How can we share between the subdomains and cross domain, and like what exactly the subdomain and cross domain belong to. Then we'll have a small demo. I have prepared a Angular 2 app example and integrated as a code snippet also there, so I can walk through on that how it got shared across the Angular. And then we can have a QA. So let's talk about what is a cookies and local storage data, right? So generally, if you like nowadays, everyone I think aware about this cookies and local. Let me just give you short details about like browser has own their data set. Like browser stores some data in browser history or browser data storage. It has a multiple data storage is available, like a cookies and local storage. A cookie can be having an expiry time to expire, like when that cookie will be deleted, or you can go to the manually deletion of the cookies also. Local storage doesn't have any expiry, like in till the you are manually deleting, it cannot be deleted like that. It has another level of the storage also. One more is like session storage. So session storage is like when you close the tab, session storage will go off. So these are all about the kind of things. Let me show you the pictures. Like it is like a HTTP cookie, a small piece of data stored on the user computer, and local storage property allow you to save key and value pairs in a browser. So you can see the pictures here, like it shows like how you can see that under the browser tab, there is an application tab will be there. You can see the cookies and local storage here. Okay. Then why it is required to share? Like somebody may have a question, right? Why that data has to be shared between the two domains? Like, so there is a one I can say the use case like on that. Suppose you have a admin access. Admin user portal is different, like admin.example.com, and another portal called suppose student.example.com, and admin want to see the student portal but not by using the student login, by using his login only. So instead of creating a student portal inside the admin, he can access the both domain using that. So when he log into when he or she log into the particular admin.example.com, right, automatically they can access the student.example.com. Okay, that is why the sharing is required. So this is also I'm trying to show it like. So generally two domain have a right with the same owner or accessible, right? Because if that two domain, the cross domain or subdomain is not belong to the particular same owner, or maybe who is owning the hosting owner, right? That cannot be possible. So prerequisite is like to use this code, both domain or both cross domain has to be along with the same owner. Avoid multiple time resource access or fetch it if it duplicate across the subdomain and cross domain. So as I said, right, if admin want to access the user account, like student account, right, he need to log in by separate credential, but like he can log in into one place and he can access across all the internal portals using the same login. That's the way the sharing happen between the subdomain and the cross domain. And the major case is like I said, right, login to the one domain and access to the all subdomain. That is one of the major case. Generally, it's happening across the like multiple places. Like even there are use cases I have created like when you have a loan application process, right, where you have a admin, like salesperson and credit person, and maybe the operation person, like that. It has a finance person. So one person can log in and across the all the portal can be accessed, but they will have the restriction according to the ACL policy. Okay. Now, how to share those like that cookies or maybe local storage data across, right? So see, there's the one person sitting the one corner, another person is sitting in another corner. So he will start publishing like I'm doing something, and there is a sending data. Like so, he's like publishing like a sending data across the channel, and it is the listener is at another side of that. So you can see that like one is the publishing, one is the listening. A similar way, the another person can be published and it can be listened to the first person also. So this is kind of very famous model called PubSub model, like publisher sender model kind of thing. So this cookie sharing work based on the publish and sharing the model based on that. So we have a code. I'll walk through on the code part that we have to share using like someone we like, okay, my job is done. Now I'm publishing thing data. Whoever the listening our data, they will receive it and they will start the processing on that across the link. The similar way, the browser will also work. The browser will have a w.example.com one browser, another browser will have a abc.example.com, and they can like vice versa. They can w.example.com can share with the abc.example.com, abc.com can be shared with the like it is like vice versa. It will rotating the each other. That's how about the sharing between the two person or two domains like work. So this is the one first like code I want to show that this is the one function I have built it, like the post cross domain message, not required to have a similar name. I have used it like a relevant particular, because it work like posting the message to the particular next domain. So that's why I call it as a function of post cross domain message. Okay, that will have message will have a multiple things, kind of things. Okay, and so we'll create a one win object. Win is like a window object, which will have a document.get element ID by IFR. IFR is belong to the ID of iframe window. So I'll show you that also. Dot content window. So what it does, win.post message. Post message is by default a browser event, okay, which is available in JavaScript and things which can receive using the data and which domain to post the parameters. Okay, so data parameter will be like post message, some message also can be there, and can be have like a key value pair data set object also, and then you can call it that the post message to particular messaging. How it look like HTML code? HTML code will look like a iframe, okay, which will be have a display as a none. Why we want to keep it display like? Because we don't want to show it to the customer side. That's why we kept it as a display, because this will be all be the hidden activity inside the two domains like that. And that one will be a SRC. SRC will be the whichever the domain we are going to post a message, which will have a some HTML file like get local HTML, something like. Angular will have something different kind of code, but if you are working on the HTML JavaScript, you can have a something similar kind of get local storage.html, which will process or which will have a listener bind toward in the HTML, which will keep listening on that part. And ID will be IFR. So this IFR we are taken from this one. That's the one side of the code, like sender. We'll just walk through the receiver code. The receiver code look like this. Receiver code is look like the permitted domain. Like, okay, so like here you can mention that you can keep it something an array, list of array, right? Which domain had to permit. That can be there. So I have kept it as a small, like I can only permit to one domain, but we can have a list of the permitted domain to have it. Like, and you can make changes in this, like, okay, instead of the equal to, keep it like in array kind of, so you can use it like. So this will have a windows.add event listener. So that sender you have seen, right? That we are using a windows.post message. Here we are using the windows.add event listener, and we are adding the event listener called message. Okay, and in this event object we will have a data and the origin which coming from the data, which origin data is coming from. Okay, so here we will check for the event data is there or not. Once the data is there, we can just go and update data in the local storage, particular that key value. Okay, if data is not there, means like something like the admin has log out, right? So they might be have flush out the data of the local storage and they have sent the empty data. That time you can just remove the local storage whichever is there, and that can be empty data. So that's about the sender receiver code. Okay. So let's talk about a demo. Okay, so what we'll have, we have a two Angular app share the logins data between them using the pub/sub pattern, similar what we have shared in the earlier slide. So I'll just walk through on that part. So I have set up the all code like initially, like there's a GitHub repository available. I'll share that in the end of the session. Cookies or local storage sharing between the Angular app. I have created two apps called adminexample.com and studentexample.com. So two Angular app inside the one repository is available. Okay, so we'll just walk through each part. So what we have to do initially part, like in a environment, you have to set up some variables called student URL or admin URL. So I have kept it like 4001 for admin and 4220 for the student URL, because this has to be very dynamically. That's why I want to avoid that hard code values and a domain permission inside the code. So this will be value accessing inside the code. I have created the service inside the service, user sharing service.ts. Okay, what it generally do, it use the like under construction will be have like getting the data from the user storage, and it has that post cross domain message, right, which I show that common, like, and it will accept some parameter like which link and which portal we have to give access to particular, like. So like suppose it now I'm in a student example, right? So I'm expecting suppose by default I put it admin, but it can be dynamically. So whoever sending this message, they can send if he's an admin, if he's an accountant, if he's a teacher, like that, they can pass that parameter here. And accordingly, we can keep adding the if else case here, which we want to use it like. So if you want to use the one domain to broadcast to like suppose 5 or 6 domain, right? You can keep adding the switch case here to accordingly that portal, and that different portal can be a broadcast that parameters there. So here you're just checking out like portal is equal to admin, then what will be my URL, host URL, and what will be my the iframe ID will be there. Okay, and then we are just getting the iframe content from the we are using the iframe ID, and here we are just checking out the similar kind of like this is the Angular code, so that's why we are using the iframe as the HTML frame element. When you are using a JavaScript, you can use like a window.content window document.element.get at iframe content window, like where you can use it. In Angular, we are using like a iframe as a HTML frame element.content window. And then storage data will be come from the this.storage. Okay, and we will have a set timeout because sometimes it takes time to broadcast the parameter. So it's like posting the parameter. So it we have a that to properly goes to particular domain. So this is the one code I have written it for a set timeout, which will do the post message as a browser event, which pass the data and which URL had to pass it. So that's about the user sharing. This is a very common user sharing pattern. You can keep it in wherever you want it to, all different domain application. We can use it there. Just want to like tweak code a little bit here and there based on the requirement. Then after we will go to the login.ts. Okay, login.ts example has like details about the when the data is like user data is already available locally, it will directly out to the dashboard. And it has a one method called do login like function and accept the parameter like username password. So I had coded here just for a testing purpose and passing the user data in username and a word around 6. And then we are setting when you have, so this is the kind of when you are doing a login, right? We are setting the item in the particular that domain first using the student.example.com as a key and the parameter data. Make sure you have to JSON, whatever object you are going to create it, you have to be stringify because that's only support the local storage about the stringifying thing. And then you can run this under the zonal. Once you're done, you can log in like direct to the dashboard here. Okay. So this is all about the things. And then I'll just show the dashboard. So once it redirect to dashboard, okay, what does dashboard generally do work? When you have ng on it, right? ng on it, it will create the iframe. Okay, iframe will have an admin iframe and then the display none. It is setting the parameter which I shown the HTML element, right? And it will send the as SRJ the admin URL. And then it will append a child that iframe URL to the particular document body. Okay, and then it will start the posting the data. So the similar, what we are using a user sharing.service. So we have import here user sharing from the service folder, and we are posting the cross domain message link URL. As I said, the link URL have to pass it and which portal you are going to be share the data. That's the portal you have to pass it here. So once we done with this, automatically that will be across the data. It will be available. So you can see that, and under the admin example. Under the login TS, already code is similar, like when data is there, it automatically it will get login. So let me show you that a terminal window. Are you able to see my code, right? No? Oh.
Now, please share again your screen.
Yeah, I'll show you my mistakes. Okay, sorry for that. I'll walk through again. Okay, no problem on that. So this now able to see screen.
Yes.
Lars, we are able to see the screen.
Yes, it's good.
Okay, yeah. So student node example and admin node example is there. So as I mentioned, I think you have heard about all these things. I just show the date, the user component service. So this is the code which I'm talking about, that it has a post cross domain message and it has the code available for a particular. And under the login, on the do login method, it has like passing to the setting that local storage domain and then redirecting to the dashboard. And once it redirects to dashboard, dashboard has ng-on-it method which do the setting of the iframe, setting of the iframe attribute, and then appending to the document element, and it's posting the admin data. So it is calling the user service of admin post cross domain message. So that's about things. So I'll just run the application now. Putting the application. Okay, both applications are ready. I'll share a browser link. My screen is visible, correct?
Yes, I see your browser.
Yes. So this is a student portal, like 4200 is a student portal, and 4401 port is the admin portal. So currently the code which I have written is only for the student to admin. If you want to do for admin to student, you have to just add the user service there, and similar logic you have to implement there. So I'll just show you the demo in that part, how it works. You can see there are no data is available. So we'll try to log in.
Wait, I see an empty tab. Is
Empty tab.
Yeah,
Okay.
maybe the wrong window was shared. That's better.
Okay. Now admin portal you're able to see.
Yes.
Both the portal you're able to see. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Very good.
So now I'll just log in with this password. Okay. So you can see the data is something wrong. I think due to some technicality, the data is not showing it, but you can see it automatically redirect to the dashboard. You can see here that we are passing the data, which message event and data will be there here. This the data is coming undefined. Okay. Okay. Let me check it. What is the problem? Might be some configuration parameters missing it. Oh, sorry, my mistake. I was checking the session storage. So you can see here the data is coming in. So when you log into the student login, it will pass the Aviva 6, and when you go to the admin portal. You can see the admin example, the data is shared here. So let it clear it and try it. Okay. So data is set here automatically. Even this also you can see data is set here automatically. So when I will go to here and you can see. So that's the way the data is getting shared between these two domains. So similarly, you can have a hostname called admin.example.com and student.example.com, and that can be shared across the two different domains. So this code is available in a GitHub repository. Okay, and you can replicate. Current code is available from student to example kind of communication, which can be same replicate can be admin to student example and can be usable. So if you have a name more than 2-3 apple, more than 2 app also, you can same replicate across all the subdomain. So that's about the demo. Any questions?
I will check the chats, but I do have a question. So is it possible to share local storage between the apps without going through a post message?
No, because post message do that transactions kind of things like publishing data. Okay, my work is done, I'm sharing the data, and then whoever the listeners are subscribed to that particular post message, they will receive the data and then they will do it. Because the thing is, without post messages, the reason is like as per the HTTP protocol, sharing a data like cookies or maybe the local storage, even if the two domains, like suppose you have a admin.example.com and student.example.com, even the both domain has been owner of will be same, till you cannot access the data between two domain as a cookie data or as a local storage. Even if you having the access to use the both domain, you cannot access. That's the HTTP protocol says about that. And to overcome to that, we are using that event called post message.
How about cookies? Are they able to be shared between the same domain and subdomain?
Yes. In similar way, post message, similar way. But without post message, like cookies, even local storage data, even session storage data cannot be shared between the cross domain or even similar subdomain owner also. We have to use it, the post message, to share the cookies and the local storage data. So local storage data is one of the example I have picked. You can use the cookies instead of the local storage wherever you want to use it. I hope you answer your question.
Perfect. Any other questions? Silent. Okay. Avinash, thank you so much for this valuable presentation.
Yes, I'll share this slide links in a chat
Okay.
window. We can share in a live session. It has that GitHub link of the code of the Angular, even JavaScript, and a detailed blog explain about this. You can see this in the PPT. These are the links available. And any problems by setting up this, you can reach out to on my Twitter handler. I'll be able to help on that.
Perfect. One more time, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Lars, you are next in line.
Awesome. Yes, so I wrote this book and finally tomorrow it's supposed to come out as in the digital version. It's called Accelerating Angular Development with Ivy. And tomorrow is the digital release, and 8 days from now, it's the physical print release, as far as I know. And you and I, Derek, we did a podcast episode on the Angular Master podcast about this book. And today we're going to be diving deep into 2 of the topics of this book. And that is, let me find my slides and set up the screens. Just give me a moment. I have too many screens, so in a second, I'll be ready. This is the screen I want to share. Here we go. Okay. Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Oh, very good. Very good. Okay, so 2 topics today. We're going to discuss strict template type checking, and we're going to discuss style binding evaluation, because both of them had significant changes in Angular Ivy. And in particular, strict template type checking was not possible before Ivy. There were other modes of strict template type checking, or sorry, template type checking, but there was a lot missing, and it was only enabled as part of Ivy. And the other topic, the style binding evaluations, they also changed in Ivy. They were possible before, but it was a bit harder to figure out what was going on. So that's what we're going to be discussing right now. And these are examples of topics from my book, as you see here in this image. It can be bought on Pact Publishing or Amazon or lots of other bookstores. So let me know what you think of it, and I'll be happy to answer any questions about the book also online. So how do I get this to change? Here we go. Okay, so first topic is style binding evaluation. What changed here is now we have precedence rules with Ivy. Before, in View Engine, things like the order of the source code mattered, but Ivy provides no guarantees that the order you write your directives is the order that are going to be applied at runtime. So it's important to have a set of rules that we can use and the runtime can use to decide which one should be applied first, which one has the most importance. So this is about, if you have one element with multiple style bindings, how does the Angular Ivy runtime decide which value will win in the end? And this is the set of style precedence rules. They can be found in the Angular documentation, and we'll look at examples of each one of them. And this is similar to a programming language where you have precedence rules for the operators. So the number 1 is the most important one. It will override all the other rules if it's applied, but there are some exceptions as well. The first one here is called the template property binding. So if we have a component with a template and we, for example, bind to this background style property and we set the color Rebecca Purple, which is named after Eric Meyer's daughter, who unfortunately passed away because of cancer. It's a very beautiful purple color, part of the web standards. So anyways, this is a template property binding. We're binding on a property using the square brackets, as we know. And this is the highest precedence of all the style bindings available in our tool chain. This one is called the template map binding. So it's very similar, but we can, I only have the background property here, but we can assign multiple bindings in an object. And of course, the object doesn't have to be inline in the template. It can be on the component model and bound to that property as well. So this is the second highest priority of style bindings. The third one is static template class and style values. So still in our components template, we can have inline styles and classes specified statically directly in the template. This has the third highest priority. And now we go from bindings in our own template to bindings applied by child components and directives. And first we have directives. They have higher precedence than child components. So the most important of the directive style bindings is the host property bindings. Here I'm using the host metadata, but it could also be using the host binding decorator in a property of this directive class. But same as before, we have the square brackets syntax for binding to this background property of the style rules for whatever element this directive is applied to. And we also have the directive host map bindings. So we can assign multiple properties again, but it has lower precedence than the one we just saw. And we can even have the static style bindings in a directive applied through host bindings as well. That's the lowest priority of the the directive style bindings. After directive style bindings comes child component style bindings. So similar, we have the component host property binding, we have the component host map bindings, and we have the static host style bindings and classes as well. And we'll see an example of all of this where we apply multiple of these style bindings in a demo on StackBlitz just in a moment. But first, there's a few exceptions to be aware of. Our old friends, ng-class and ng-style, these are some of the common directives provided by Angular itself. And every time the view of a component is updated, the ng-class and the ng-style directives will override every other possible binding on an element. So this is like the exclamation mark important in CSS, but for Angular styles. So ng-style, ng-class will always override everything else. So even though it's not in the precedence list at all, yeah, it overrides everything else. So this can be important to know. So use it very sparingly, just as we wouldn't be using exclamation mark important everywhere. So there's also a special case of nullish values, and the nullish values are null and undefined. If we assign a null value to a style binding, it will say, it will remove all the other style bindings for that property. So here we see we have this map binding for purple, but we also have the property binding assigning the background to null. So this results in no background color at all to this element in the example. So that is the null value, but the undefined value will skip this style binding. So the property style binding at the top is basically skipped or ignored, so that the next highest priority will be in effect. And because of that, we now have a purple background color on this element. So null and undefined have different meanings, different semantics. That's very important to be aware of. It's also important to know that the ordering of style bindings doesn't matter. It's still the precedence that decides what comes into effect. And this is different from View Engine. In View Engine, there were a lot of cases where ordering mattered more than the type of binding. So here we have this example of a template property binding of the color blue, and we have this template map binding of the purple background color, but the element is blue. Even if we switch the order, the element is still blue. It doesn't become purple because the precedence is the same. However, there's one exception to this fact as well, and that is it does not, ordering does not matter except when bindings have the same precedence. So in this case, the last one wins. So here we see that the example from before, but now we add another property binding of red. So now it becomes red. If we, or sorry, and if we switched around the blue and the red binding here, the blue one would win. But this is not something we should count on really, because Ivy does not guarantee the order of of directives and bindings. So it seems to work right now, but that might change in the future. But something to be aware of. Now let's look at this demo, see if I can get it up on the screen with all these windows here. So let me know if you cannot see my screen, just let me know. Should be able to see it now, hopefully. I don't know, let me know if you want the light theme instead of the dark theme.
Look good, okay, looks good.
Okay, thank you. So here we have many different style bindings on this one app component. We have some, let's see, we have some here that are template style bindings. We have a component here which might also have some style bindings. We have a directive here which might also have some style bindings, and let's check if that's the case. Indeed it is. The host style directive does have a few style bindings, and the host style component also has a few style bindings. So now the question is, this element right here, which background color might it have? We're looking at all of these, and I don't know if anyone remembers what we just went through. Is there, what would tell you which color would be applied here? Let me know in the chat, or Avi or Darek, you can answer maybe if you have suggestions.
Yes.
So what do you think, Darek?
Sorry, one more time.
Which rule will win of all these style bindings? What would be the color of this element?
NG style.
NG style, okay. So that applies the crimson color. Let's see if you're right. Hey, that is the crimson color. So you're right, Darek. And that was the important one, overriding everything else. So be very careful with NG style. And if I switch the order, we see that it's still crimson red. So that doesn't affect anything. But what if I go and delete it? Then the next one would be, come on, Stack Blitz. It's having some issues right now. I think it has some stage fright. Let me reboot this one. It's compiling something. Okay, let me try again. If I delete this one, what's the result? Yeah, okay, Stack Blitz is not very happy. That's unfortunate. But anyways, I'll tell you what's supposed to happen is this one is the template property binding, hot pink. So it should become pink as soon as I remember that I removed that NG style. And the same thing applies. If I change the order, it would still be pink. And if I delete that one, the next one is this host map binding. So that will be coral colored. And removing that, I have a static template style binding of gold. So that would be the next one. Removing that, I now have an element which is a component, and it also has the directive applied. So between child components and directives, the directive is the second most important after the template style bindings themselves. So it's more important than the child component. So we have to look into this host style directive to figure out what would be the color right now if StackBlitz was doing its thing properly. So in the directive, we see that there are two style bindings. So which one is the most important? This one is called the static style binding in the directive, so a static host style binding. And this one is called the host property binding in the directive. Between these two, it's still the property binding, which is the most important one. So it would be purple next, and removing that, it would become olive green. And now we have no style bindings left. So this is like removing this directive shouldn't matter. And now we're left with just this one component, a child component to our app component. It also has two style bindings, and they're the similar style as before. So it's again the property binding, but in a child component. So it would be navy blue. And finally, if we remove that binding, it would become tan. This is the static style binding in a component. So sadly, the demo didn't work right now, but you can get the link. I don't know if YouTube won't allow me to post it. And I can't find the chat right now in Zoom. I don't know a lot about Zoom. So hopefully you can find it in the slides here afterwards. I already tweeted out these slides. Let's look at the next slide. So now let's move on to strict template type checking. This is a major developer productivity boost because we get fast feedback. We get compilation errors. We even get tool tips as we're writing the code when we're using the Angular language service, which has been upgraded a lot as well as part of the Ivy release and all the Ivy versions. So this is a very important tool for us developers because before, I mean, we might not catch these errors before the production runtime, and that would be a shame. So the Angular language service and the Angular compiler for the template has been unable to catch some of the type errors, and we'll walk through them now and see which one. And they're all new with the exception of one of them, which was also available in View Engine. So all good stuff. First, we have to enable a few settings for compilers. There's the TypeScript compiler. It needs strict true, which is a preset for a lot of different strict settings. So enabling that will enable many rules, many strict type checking rules for TypeScript. And that also affects our Angular component templates. We also have to enable strict templates for the Angular compiler options. And that is also a preset of, I think it's like 8 or 9 different strict rules for template compilation in Angular. And we also have this strict input access modifiers, which is also related, but it's not part of the strict templates preset. So we have to enable that separately. The strict injection parameters does not have to do with components and templates specifically, but it's yet another setting that can be enabled also with some strict rules, but has to do with dependency injection in all Angular classes. So these are the 3 settings we need to get the most strict settings and catch the most errors in our templates. So the strict templates preset is actually shorthand for all these different 9 rules here. And only the strict literal types was available in View Engine if we used the full template type checking. Early in Angular, we got the basic template type checking. Later on, we got in View Engine still, we got the full template type checking. And now we have the strict template type checking, which allows us to type check all the possible properties and expressions and generics in our templates. So that's very nice because we're all using TypeScript. So we were losing out on a very important part of our application with type checking it. So we had to rely on tests to catch it before runtime. Okay, so strict templates will enable all these rules. And we can also enable the strict input access modifiers.
That's not the tech you do.
No, kis mikrofon.
Hey, I
There's
think you
Romina,
should,
so you
I think you should mute. Thank you. So the first one here is the strict attribute types. And this is what it will look like when using the Angular language service. I have my counter component. It has an input property count defaults to 0. And in the top, that's the template of a parent component using this counter component. And when I use the counter component in my parent component, I will get this error. You see that the count property or attribute has these tilde characters below it. So it's highlighted in my editor if I'm using the Angular language service and have strict template type checking enabled. So I can hover over it and I'll get an error message. And if I compile my application, I will get the same error message. So let's do that. And it looks like so. You get this very good error message. It's highlighting the template that has the issue. It's writing these tilde characters again. And it's saying this is in the app component. It has an error in this template. And the error is the type string is not assignable to the type number. So our mistake here was we forgot the square brackets. And when we do that, it's an attribute. So it is the string of 1 instead of the number 1 that is passed to our counter component, but it expects a number, not a string. So that's a type error. And View Engine was not able to catch this error. So we're thankful to Ivy and the Angular language service and the improvements to the Angular compiler when it comes to templates with these strict template type checkings. So next setting is this strict context generics. This is an advanced one, but try to keep up. Say we have this user list component and it has a generic parameter of the T user. And as a minimum, this extends or implements the interface user, which has 2 properties, an address and a name, and the address property is another type. So our user list component has a user's input property, which has to, it's an array of T users. So it's a generic parameter, objects that have the address and name properties in an array. So now we're in the template of this user list component. We're looping over this users array. And we're trying to add a link to the detail page of each of these users, but we're getting an error right at the user.id. So what's our mistake here? If we hover over the error, or if we compile the application, we will get a message similar to this one. So again, it's highlighting the template with this the error, and it's saying it's in the user list component. And the error message is the property ID does not exist on type T user. So the T user interface does not even mention an ID. So maybe we just forgot or someone deleted it by accident. So that's another typing error we can now catch with the compiler. And even when writing the code, we'll get an error message straight away and we can hover over it, get this nice error detail. But yeah, this is for generic types that not a lot of components have them, but some structural directives, for example, they might be useful for. And it's part of allowing type checking of ng4, for example. All right, the next one is called strict DOM event types. So this is about the $event object, special one we can use in Angular templates. That is now type checked for native DOM events bindings. So for example, the click event as we see here. And we are passing this event object to, this is the template of a parent component, sorry, the button component, and we're binding it to this event handler called onClick. We're expecting an input event, and then we will call an output property called appClick and emit another event. But we're getting an error here, and the reason is a mouse event is not an input event. So the click event, the native click event, will produce a mouse event, but in our event handler, we were expecting an input event. So that's a mistake. So it should probably have been a mouse event, right? This was another thing that was not possible before in View Engine. So this is only possible to produce a compiler error or inline error in our editor as part of Ivy and having strict template type checking enabled. There's also the strict DOM local ref types. So template variables such as this user control template ref, which is referring to a DOM element because it doesn't have any components or directives attached. They can now be type checked. So we have our input element, and in the same template, we're also using a button, and we bind to the click event, and then we're trying to assign 4 to the property rows on this user control, the input element. This is an error, and the message is there's no rows property on an HTML input element. There are, however, rows properties on text areas, so we probably changed it from a text area to an input element at some point. And now we're getting a compilation error. The strict input access modifiers is the one that's not enabled by strict templates, the preset. So we have to enable this separately. It will prevent every TypeScript private, protected, or read-only input property from being bound. So if we have any access modifiers on an input property other than public, Angular will now not allow us to bind to that property. Because this is a violation of TypeScript, basically. So a parent component in a template is trying to assign or have Angular assign a value to the count property of this read-only counter component. And since it's read-only, the property, no one should be able, according to TypeScript rules, no one should be able to reassign that property. So that's the error. And the error message looks like so. Cannot assign to count because it is a read-only property, and it highlights the template with the issue, and it mentions that this template is in the app component. Strict input types is type checking of input property bindings. So we have another parent component that's the template at the top. It's using this message form component, which has its class at the bottom. And it's trying to bind a value to message. But this time we added the square brackets. So now it's the number 2021 rather than a string, which is what the message form component expects for its input property. So we will see this error message, for example. The number type is not assignable to the string type. So another strict template type check enabled by Ivy, and a very important one, right? So it's hard to imagine that this was not possible in View Engine. We're so much more fortunate now with our developer experience when developing Ivy versions of Angular. Strict literal types was also available in View Engine if we enabled the full template type checking mode. So this is about array and object literals that are written directly in the template of our components. They were not possible to type check at all before full template type checking. So it was possible in View Engine with full template type checking. It was not possible in View Engine when we were using the basic template type checking. So here we have an object literal. We're trying to assign or bind a user object. It has an address, which is an empty object, and it has a name, which is Lars. So what is the error here? The error is that this user interface has an address property, and the address type is another interface expecting a city property, which is a string. So we forgot about that. And because of that, we're getting this nice error message. The property city is missing in the type empty object, but required in the type address. So very good error message. And I think the error messages, even though this was possible in View Engine, the error messages have been improved a lot in Ivy as well. And that goes for all the compilation errors, including strict template type checking. Strict null input types, we're getting towards the end, don't worry. Strict null input types is strict type checking for nullishness. So this is similar to the strict null check for the TypeScript compiler. And this is an important one, especially for this use case we see right here. We have this app component. It's using this user list component we saw before, and it's trying to bind something from the user's observable and then using the AsyncPipe. And now we're getting an error message that we never saw before in View Engine. And I wonder what that error message is. By the way, this is the NG Workers team, Nacho, Santosh, and Serkan, that are our users here. Shout out to them. And the error message we're getting is this. The type of read-only user array, or null, is not assignable to the type read-only user array. So what's going on? To figure this out, we actually need another piece of information. So we'll get back to that. But it has to do with the AsyncPipe. Strict output event types is another setting. And now we have this special $event object again. And this time it's not a native DOM event, it's a custom event on a component. So it's an output property that we're binding to. We're seeing here we have this read-only counter. We're using it as a child component. It has a count change output property, and we want to capture that value and pass it to our event handler called onCountChange in our app component. So we're expecting count to be a string, so we can assign it to our private member, which is also a string called hash count. But what's the error here? When we compile or hover over this error, we see number is not assignable to a parameter of type string. So we were expecting a string, but the output property was emitting numbers, which we can't see just from looking at the template. So very good to have another strict template type check on these component events. Strict safe navigation types is this question mark dot operator, the Elvis operator. It's called in some languages. In Angular, it's called the safe navigation operator. In TypeScript, it's called the optional chaining operator. But it was in Angular templates before it was even in TypeScript. And there it's still called the safe navigation operator. So we can now type check expressions involving this strict this safe navigation operator. So we have this UI method called trim on our component. We're passing it the name property of the user if it's available. But we're getting an error. And why are we getting an error here? The argument of type string or undefined is not assignable to parameter of type string. So our trim method was expecting a string, not undefined, not null. And we see that our user input property can hold a user value or a null value, and it's assigned to null by default. But when we use the save navigation operator and the left-hand side of the operation is null or undefined, then the entire expression is evaluated to undefined, not null, undefined. So our trim method it has to accept and handle the undefined type, or we should change something in our template. So that's what this strict template type check is now available to catch. And this could very easily have resulted in a runtime error before, because in the trim method, we are calling the trim method on the string variable called text. And if that's an undefined value, it's bad. Yeah. So a good error message again, kind of, at least it highlights where the issue is. And then we have to know about the save navigation operator and how it's evaluated, similar to the optional chaining operator in TypeScript. So it always evaluates to undefined when it's short-circuited. So when the user is null or undefined, then the whole expression is actually undefined. So we have to handle that in some way. So now we're back to this thing about trying to bind null from an observable. And the reason was the AsyncPipe from Angular. The AsyncPipe initially emits a null value. So input properties that are bound with the AsyncPipe must either include null in their types and handle those, or use this concept known as input setter type hints in Angular. They look like so. So here we have this button component. We're using it in a parent component at the top, and we're trying to bind a value to its text input property from our button text observable, and then using it with the AsyncPipe. The problem is our setter for the text input property only accepts a string, but the AsyncPipe wants to pass a null value. How can we handle this? There's this special thing called input setter type hints in Angular, where we add a static property with the prefix of ng accept input type underscore, and then the name of the input property, which is text here. And then we can magically add the type of string or null. And this allows us to, it will make the Angular template compiler accept a null value into our text setter, even though it's not written in the setter. And the reason that's important is because if we added the null type to both the setter, we also have to add it to the getter, and that could cause some issues in the template of this button component, because then we had to handle null values in all the places in the template we're using that value. So instead, now, even though the setter sets value of string, the Angular compiler will allow string or null. So it will allow the AsyncPipe to work, but we have to, of course, handle that null value in our setter still. And that's what we're doing here. We're adding a default value of push me if it's null. This is very weird, and but that's the Angular way of doing it, is this input setter type hints. Since this was introduced, TypeScript itself added, in one of the most recent versions, it added the option to differ the type between setters and getters, so that we could have value is string or null in the setter, but only string in the getter. So that's a language feature in TypeScript nowadays. I think it's possible in Angular 12 or maybe 13 or something like that. So that's another option for solving this issue. But the Angular way has been to add this static property, which is called an input setter type hint. We can configure the Angular language service. And I have experienced that the extension for VS Code only considers tsconfig.json in the root folder of our workspace. And if that root tsconfig doesn't mention strict templates true, it will come up with this dialog saying, hey, you don't have strict template type checking enabled. So it doesn't, the extension will enable it either for all projects or for no projects in the root config. But the compiler will respect the project specific settings. So that's a bit strange. I don't know if it's only VS Code that has this issue in the extension, but make sure it's enabled in the root tsconfig file. We can also enable it to libraries. It's very similar, but you have to add it to the tsconfig libjson in a library, same settings, looks like so. And here you can explore this repo on your own, where I create violations of all these rules. And then there are 3 app projects. One has basic type template type checking, one has full template type checking, one has strict template type checking. Then you can see the effect of adding stricter type checking, catching errors in the same code base. So that's kind of fun. And in our conclusion, if you remember from the beginning, we saw these style binding precedence rules. There are 3 categories. There are template bindings in the component's template, and that component template can use child components. They have the lowest precedence. Directives have the second precedence, and the templates, the bindings themselves, have the highest precedence. And we learned that the style binding ordering does not affect the style evaluation, well, except for some exceptions here. We learned that the ng class and the ng style, they override all other style bindings. Knowledge values affect the style evaluation, and null and undefined have different meanings semantically. And we also learned that if we have style bindings of the same precedence, the last one specified in the source code wins. Strict template type checking can be enabled for Angular applications and for Angular libraries. We can configure them. We can use the strict templates preset to enable 9 settings, or we can disable them or enable them one at a time. We can take care when we're configuring the Angular language service, because my experience is that we have to make sure to specify it in the root tsconfig to enable it. But when we have that, we get inline type checks provided by the Angular language service. So we get tooltips with errors. We can hover over them and see the error message immediately, so that we don't have to wait for compilation of our application. But we also do get them, the type checks, at compile time. So we'll catch them at the latest at compile time, which is great. Strict template type checks, we saw rules defining type checks for attribute style property bindings, input property bindings with knowledgeness checks, this generic context component type parameter. We saw array and object literals and templates. We saw the safe navigation operator, the Elvis operator. We saw the $event object, both for the custom events and for the native DOM events, even for animation bindings, and also for template variables referencing DOM elements. We can now add type checks to all these kinds of code in our component templates. This strict input access modifier prevents us from binding values to private, protected, or read-only input properties. We can consider using runtime private members, which are now part of both TypeScript and ECMAScript, or at least they're in one of the final stages, and they're finally working properly for methods as well in TypeScript. We can use them instead of the private TypeScript private property methods. We could also use just a getter with a private backing field instead of a read-only member. So these are different strategies for getting around what we really want to express. The AsyncPipe is a special case, because when we enable strict null input types, we finally get an error when using the AsyncPipe, because it does emit that initial null value. So to handle that, we can add null to our input property types, or we can accept null through this input setter type hints, or we can even use the language feature of TypeScript to use a different type between setters and getters. This is the book. It's published tomorrow in the digital version. The print version will be shipped, I hope, 8 days from now. That's the release date, at least, as far as I'm aware. I wrote it with Gyrup Brink Nielsen, another Dane, and the foreword is by Santosh Yadav, a Google developer expert in Angular. And you can buy it from Pact or Amazon, other bookstores. It has 3 parts, 12 chapters, 200 pages, 12 feature apps, and a real-world app. And listen to this podcast, Angular Master podcast, one of the most recent episodes where we spent 40 minutes discussing this book. Thank you all for now. This is my Twitter handle, and that's all from me.
Thank you so much, Lars. It was very informative. Thank you so much. There are any questions, maybe?
I have one. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So it's not about template checks, but on one of your slides, you had an input decorator on top of read-only property.
Mm-hmm.
Would it make sense to prohibit this because in Angular? What do you think? Because it seems like it doesn't make sense to put an input decorator on a read-only property. You shouldn't be assigning anything to it, right?
Yes, and that's why Angular with strict template type checkings will now complain and say that that doesn't make sense. So remove the read-only property or remove the input decorator. This is not really allowed in TypeScript. So yeah, of course it's an error, but Angular can't tell you whether the error is that you added the read-only access modifier or that you added the input property. Maybe you had the input the input decorator on a separate line, and then you switch some properties around, and now it's applied to a read-only property instead of the one it was actually supposed to work with. So yeah, several reasons for doing such a mistake, but now Ivy can catch it for us, so that's nice.
Any other questions? I have one about the book.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you said 8 days from now is the paper version?
Yes, then it will be published on Amazon, the paper version. As far as I know, it's been ready for a while, but printing it, I guess, takes some time, and because they had some publishing schedules. So I thought it was released a month ago, but yeah, it's only now. So I'm very excited for that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading this book. And so I hope I can get it before NG Poland.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so. And yeah, I'm optimistic. But I'll also bring some copies to NG Poland. I can only bring, I don't know, maybe I'll bring 10 or so. But if you already purchased it and bring it, I'll be happy to sign the book at the conference, or you can buy these few copies that I'll bring myself.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Okay, so if there are no questions, I'd like to thank you all. It was a pleasure to meet you today. And so, yeah, please buy this book. It promised to be excellent. Please visit NG Poland and JS Poland site. So the conference is conferences are less than 1 month. So we see in Warsaw very, very soon. Thank you so much. I'm back to work on NG Poland and JS Poland, and so bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Nice seeing you, both of you, and I really look forward to NG Poland.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you, and see you later in Poland. Bye, guys.
See you.